Have you ever been told that your dreams are impossible? That you don't have what it takes? Imagine hearing that. And instead of breaking down, you use it as fuel to build one of the greatest empires of creativity the world has ever seen. That was the story of a young man named Walt Disney. Long before the magic castles, the theme parks, and the movies that shaped generations, he was just a small-town boy with a pencil, a sketch pad, and a dream that most people thought was ridiculous. Walt grew up in a poor family in Missouri. His father, Elias Disney, was a strict man who didn't believe much in fantasy. Life was about hard work, not dreams. Walt, however, saw the world differently. He looked at fields, trees, and animals and imagined stories in everything. While other kids played, Walt was sketching. While others laughed at cartoons in newspapers, Walt dreamed of creating his own. But the world doesn't immediately reward dreamers. It tests them first. When Walt was a teenager, he got his first real job as a cartoon artist at a local newspaper. Excited, full of energy, and ready to prove himself, he poured his heart into his drawings. Yet one morning he was called into the editor's office and fired. The reason? The editor told him bluntly, "You lack imagination and have no good ideas. Think about that for a second." A man who would one day create Mickey Mouse Disneyland and the Lion King was once told he had no imagination. Most people would have quit. Most people would have taken those words to heart and let them define their future, but not Walt. Something inside him refused to give up. He didn't argue, he didn't fight. He simply decided that failure would not be the end of his story. That's the moment where dreams either die or evolve. For Walt, they evolved. He began freelancing as an artist. He faced rejection after rejection. Some days he couldn't even afford food. But he kept sketching, kept imagining, kept believing. He was broke, often sleeping in his small studio with mice running around. Ironically, one of those little mice would later become his most famous creation. Walt decided to start his own company called Laugh-O-Gram Studios in Kansas City. He hired young artists and began producing short cartoons. For a while, things looked promising, until the studio went bankrupt. Walt had nothing left. No money, no company, no plan. He was 22 years old, sitting on a train with just a few dollars in one suitcase heading to Hollywood. That train ride changed everything. Because it wasn't just a ride, it was a rebirth. As the train rattled down the tracks, Walt didn't focus on his failure. He thought about what he could create next. He believed that success wasn't about never falling. It was about how fast you stand back up. He decided that this failure wasn't the end. It was the first step. When he arrived in California, he had no connections and no investors. He borrowed money, used a borrowed camera, and started making cartoons again in a small garage. That's where the seed of Disney Studios began to grow. Walt's first big creation was a character called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. It became successful. Audiences loved it. For the first time, it seemed like things were finally turning around. But when he went to renew his contract, he discovered something devastating. The studio that distributed his films had secretly taken ownership of the character. They fired him and stole everything he had created. Once again, he was left with nothing. Imagine that, losing your most successful creation, being betrayed by the very people you trusted. But here's where Walt Disney became unstoppable. On his long train ride back home after that betrayal, something magical happened. He began sketching in his notebook again, and that's when a small, cheerful mouse came to life on paper. A mouse with round ears and big eyes. A mouse named Mickey. From that moment, everything began to change. They say that when everything is taken from you, that's when your true power begins to appear. For Walt Disney, it was in the middle of his deepest loss that his greatest creation was born. After losing his beloved character Oswald the Lucky Rabbit to corporate greed, Walt sat quietly on the train heading back to California. The pain was real. He had poured his soul into that character. But instead of drowning in anger or bitterness, his mind began to imagine something new. He thought about how he had lost almost everything, twice. Once when his first studio went bankrupt, and now again when his creation was stolen. But this time, something inside him shifted. He refused to let others define his destiny. As the train moved across the countryside, his imagination took over. He began sketching small figures in his notebook. Round head, small nose, big cheerful eyes. That little drawing would one day become Mickey Mouse. Think about it. One of the most iconic characters in history was born from betrayal, not success. That's the beauty of the human spirit. When life pushes us to the edge, that's where our real creativity is unlocked. When Walt returned home, he was filled with new energy. He and his brother Roy began working day and night, giving life to the mouse who would change their future. But success didn't come immediately. The first few versions of Mickey didn't attract much attention. No one believed in him, just like before. Yet Walt had something stronger than approval. He had belief. He believed that this character was different, that Mickey represented joy, resilience, and hope. So he did something bold. He gave Mickey a voice, and it was his own. Walt himself voiced the character, giving life and emotion to the mouse that was born out of pain. And then came Steamboat Willie in 1928, the first synchronized sound cartoon. Audiences had never seen or heard anything like it. When Mickey whistled at the wheel of that steamboat, the crowd went silent, and then erupted in laughter and applause. It was pure magic. In that moment, Walt Disney didn't just win an audience. He proved something powerful to the world. Failure isn't the opposite of success. Failure builds success. Every rejection, every loss, every painful night had led him to that single moment. The man who was once told he had no imagination had now changed the world of animation forever. But success is never a straight line. It's a staircase, and every step is built on the lessons of failure. After Mickey's success, Walt kept dreaming bigger. He created Donald Duck, Goofy, Pluto, and many others. His studio began to grow, and for the first time his vision seemed unstoppable. But deep down, Walt wanted to create something more than cartoons. He wanted to tell stories that touched the human heart. Tales that made people believe in good, in courage, in hope. So he began working on something no one had ever dared to attempt. A full-length animated movie. When he announced Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, critics laughed. They called it Disney's folly. No one believed audiences would sit through a cartoon for more than a few minutes. They said it would destroy his company. Walt didn't listen. He had already faced worse. Failure didn't scare him anymore. He mortgaged everything he owned, poured every dollar, every ounce of energy into that movie. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. Even his brother Roy was afraid. But Walt saw what no one else could, a vision of beauty, innocence, and magic. When Snow White premiered in 1937, people laughed, cried, and cheered. It was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Critics who once mocked him now called it a masterpiece. The film became one of the highest-grossing movies of its time. That single success transformed Walt Disney from a struggling animator into a legend. But what's truly inspiring isn't the film's success. It's how he got there. He failed, he lost everything, he was betrayed, and yet he refused to stop dreaming. That's the mindset that separates achievers from quitters. Most people give up when they face pain. The extraordinary ones turn pain into power. Walt Disney once said, "All our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them." That wasn't just a quote. It was his entire life philosophy. He had every reason to give up, but instead, he built an empire on the same ground where he once fell. Every time life closed a door, he built a new one and opened it himself. He didn't wait for the world to believe in him. He believed first, and that's why the world followed. Success changes many things, but it doesn't change the nature of dreams. Even after building one of the most successful animation studios in the world, Walt Disney wasn't satisfied. For him, success was never about money. It was about creating experiences that made people believe again. He had seen how people lit up when they watched Snow White. That magic, that moment of wonder, stayed with him. But when the movie ended, the feeling faded. Walt wanted to create a place where that magic never ended. A place where imagination was real, where families could laugh, dream, and forget their troubles together. That's when the idea of Disneyland was born. But once again, just like every great dreamer, Walt was met with laughter, doubt, and resistance. People told him it was impossible. A theme park for families? A park that was clean, safe, beautiful? They said no one would come. They said he was throwing away his fortune. Bankers refused to invest. Even his closest advisors thought it was a fantasy. But Walt had been here before. He had faced rejection so many times that doubt no longer scared him. It motivated him. He told them, if you can dream it, you can do it. He began sketching the park himself, building models, imagining every detail. From the sound of laughter echoing through Main Street to the sparkle in a child's eyes as they met Mickey Mouse for the first time. He mortgaged his house, borrowed money, and convinced a few brave investors to believe in him. And even when the project began, disaster followed him again. Construction delays, financial shortages, design errors, every step seemed cursed. People called it Walt's biggest mistake. He was ridiculed in newspapers. Critics said he had lost his touch, that success had gone to his head. But Walt didn't let fear in. Because he understood something most people never realize. The size of your dream will always determine the size of your struggle. He kept pushing forward. There comes a moment in every great life when the body begins to slow down, but the spirit refuses to surrender. For Walt Disney, that moment came quietly. Even after decades of relentless creation, from Mickey Mouse to Disneyland, his mind was still overflowing with ideas. But time was beginning to test him once again. In the 1960s, as Disneyland reached worldwide fame, Walt began planning something even bigger, a place where imagination met innovation. He wanted to build a city that represented the future, Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. It wasn't just another attraction. It was his ultimate vision, a living, breathing world where technology, creativity, and humanity could thrive together. He spent days sketching, writing, and imagining. He would walk into meetings filled with architects and engineers, his eyes bright, his tone confident, painting pictures of the future with his words. He spoke about a world that didn't yet exist, and somehow made everyone believe it could. But beneath the brilliance and excitement, Walt's health began to decline. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1966. The man who had spent his life creating worlds for others now faced the harshest truth of life. His own time was running out. Yet even in the hospital, hooked up to tubes, surrounded by machines, he never stopped dreaming. He would lie in bed with plans spread across his lap, maps, drawings, lists. His brother Roy would visit him, and Walt would point at the ceiling as if he could still see something no one else could. He described where each part of Epcot would go, every building, every road, every dream. He didn't talk about dying. He talked about building, because for him, life had always been about creation, about turning thoughts into reality. His body was failing, but his mind remained unstoppable. He passed away in December 1966, leaving behind a world forever changed. He never saw Epcot completed. He never walked through it. But his dream didn't die with him, because dreams that are built on belief live forever. When his brother Roy stood before the final plans, he whispered, "This is for Walt." And 1 year later, Epcot opened, a living monument to a man who refused to stop imagining, even when his time was over. That's the kind of power vision has. It can outlive the person who created it. Walt Disney's story isn't just about cartoons, theme parks, or fame. It's about the unstoppable strength of human imagination. He proved that success isn't about what you have. It's about what you believe in. He was fired for lacking imagination. He went bankrupt. He was betrayed. He lost everything more than once. And yet, he rose again and again, because he believed in something the world couldn't yet see. He understood that failure doesn't mean you're finished. Failure is feedback. Failure is redirection. Failure is the world's way of asking, how badly do you want it? That's the truth most people miss. The path to greatness is never straight. It's full of pain, rejection, and doubt. But it's those exact moments that shape your strength, your discipline, and your resilience. Walt once said, The difference between winning and losing is most often not quitting. And that's the key. He never quit, even when his dreams collapsed. Even when people laughed, even when life hit him harder than before, he kept going, because deep down he knew that every setback had a purpose. Every loss was preparing him for something bigger. Today, billions of people around the world still feel his magic. Not because of the castles, movies, or parks, but because of what they represent. Hope. Hope that failure isn't final. Hope that imagination can rebuild anything. Hope that one dream, one idea, one act of courage can change the world. Walt Disney wasn't just a dreamer. He was a reminder that inside every one of us lives the power to create, to rebuild, to rise again. You don't have to be rich, lucky, or gifted. You just have to believe, when no one else does. When people tell you your dreams are too big, remember his story. When life knocks you down, remember his rise. When the world laughs, keep building. Because someday, those same people will stand inside the dream you refuse to give up on. And they'll call it magic. When Walt Disney took his final breath, many believed his story had reached its end. But true visionaries never really die. Their dreams echo through time. Because when you build something out of pure belief, it becomes immortal. After his passing, the world began to realize what Walt had truly built. Not just an entertainment company, not just a theme park, but a movement of imagination. His ideas became more than dreams. They became blueprints for how to live with courage, persistence, and faith in the impossible. And here lies the greatest truth about success. It's not measured by how high you climb, but by how deeply your purpose roots itself in the hearts of others. Walt didn't build for applause. He built for impact. He created not to impress, but to inspire. That's why decades after his death, every child who smiles at a Disney movie, every adult who walks through Disneyland, every dreamer who dares to believe again, keeps his spirit alive. That's what real success looks like. It's when your actions continue to speak long after your voice has gone silent. It's the psychology of lasting success. And it begins with one thing: purpose. Purpose is the anchor of every great life. Without it, you drift. With it, you become unstoppable. Psychologists have studied this for decades. People with a strong why in life are far more resilient, creative, and persistent in the face of failure. Walt Disney's why was simple yet powerful: to make people happy. That purpose carried him through every rejection, every bankruptcy, every heartbreak. When he was fired for lacking creativity, his purpose didn't waver. When his studio collapsed, his purpose gave him strength to start again. When his dreams were stolen, his purpose became his fuel. That's the secret of unstoppable people. They're not motivated by applause, money, or fame. They're driven by something deeper, a mission so powerful that no failure can kill it. And here's the part most people forget. Purpose doesn't protect you from pain. It just gives your pain meaning. The difference between those who give up and those who rise lies in what they believe their suffering is for. Walt didn't see failure as proof he wasn't good enough. He saw it as a step toward something greater. He didn't run from pain. He used it as a compass, pointing him toward growth. He once said, "All the adversity I've had in my life, all my troubles and obstacles have strengthened me. You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you." He walked through the construction site every single day, encouraging his workers, sharing his vision, lifting their spirits when things went wrong. He didn't just dream. He made others believe in that dream, too. Finally, on July 17, 1955, Disneyland opened its gates for the first time. It should have been the happiest day of his life, but it turned into chaos. The park was overcrowded. Rides broke down. Food ran out. Asphalt melted in the summer heat. News reporters called it a failure. They mocked Walt's Magic Kingdom as a disaster. For anyone else, it would have been a nightmare. But for Walt, it was just another beginning. He smiled through it all and said, "This will never happen again." He spent the next weeks fixing everything, improving, refining, learning. And within months, Disneyland became one of the most visited places in America. Families came from all over the world. Children laughed. Parents smiled. The magic he had dreamed of finally came alive, not on a movie screen, but in real life. And through it all, Walt never forgot the lessons that had shaped him. The same failures that broke him once had built the strength to rise again. Every setback had prepared him for this. Walt understood something profound about human nature, that happiness isn't found in comfort or success, but in progress. We feel alive when we're moving forward, when we're building, when we're daring to turn the impossible into possible. Psychologists call it the growth drive, that inner force that pushes us beyond what's easy or safe. Walt lived by it. He once said, "It's kind of fun to do the impossible." And that's exactly what he did, again and again. Soon, Disneyland became more than a park. It became a symbol. Proof that imagination, when fueled by courage, can reshape reality. People who had once laughed at Walt's dreams now took their families to experience them. The same newspapers that mocked him now called him a visionary, but Walt wasn't done yet. While everyone celebrated his success, his mind was already chasing a new horizon. He began dreaming of something even greater, a city of the future. A place that could reinvent how people live and work together. That dream would one day evolve into Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Walt never stopped dreaming, because he knew something most people forget. The day you stop dreaming is the day you stop living. His life was a testament to a simple truth, that success doesn't protect you from failure, and failure doesn't define you unless you stop trying.